Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on another beautiful sunny day in London. I hope everyone is staying safe and well. Myself and Gab, my colleague from Freestack, are super excited about having the opportunity to talk to you today. And as you can see from this title slide, we are talking about how ambassadors are able to support brands in a crisis, not necessarily in a coronavirus crisis, in any sort of crisis, but obviously it's particularly apt at this time. So without further ado, we're gonna jump straight in and aim to give you some really useful, insightful takeaways by the end of this session. Just for those of you who don't know who we are, Freestack is a platform as well as an agency that connects brands with content creators and influencers, specifically in the outdoors and endurance sports sector. We've been running the business for about 7 years. We built the platform about 4 years ago. So in influencer marketing terms, we are old hands. As it currently stands, we have a community of around about 1,500 content creators who are part of the Freestack community and are on the platform. They have a reach in excess of 25 million. We focus pretty much on what we would call the macro to micro influencers. So we're not a platform that has celebrities or elite athletes. We aim to have people on the platform who are very approachable, very kind of real, and that seems for us to have the best impact for our clients. And we have had the opportunity to work with a wide range of brands. Some of them obviously are household names. Many of them are much smaller. We find that one of the things about influencer marketing is that it is entirely possible for brands that have a very limited budget, very modest amount of money to invest to actually get huge benefits from working with content creators, which is something that we talk about as often as we have the opportunity. So whether you are a Nike or an Under Armour or a Shimano, or you are in fact a startup business or even a one person band, it's still possible to get quite a lot of bang for your buck from influencer marketing. So that is by way of a very quick introduction to Freestack and who we are. On this webinar today, your hosts are me. My name is Simon Freeman. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Freestack, and I'm joined today by Gabriel Briggs, who is our account manager, and he works closely with all of the brands that we have the opportunity to run campaigns for. So Gab is the guy who spends pretty much his entire waking life working with brands to make sure they get the most from their ambassadors and from the content creator relationships that they have. So much of today's discussion is going to be led by Gab, because he's the guy that's got the most experience in how to get the most from influencer marketing and ambassador programs. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we are going to set the scene. We think it's worth just talking a little bit about the state of the market. We're then going to dive straight into ambassadors during a crisis. We'll have a quick look at what an ambassador is and how we see that as being different to an influencer. And we'll be talking about how ambassadors can align with your broader marketing strategy. We'll talk a little bit about how you can work with ambassadors, how you can manage them. We'll talk a little bit about when to start, and then we'll dip our toe into what we think the world might look like, certainly for brands and influencers post COVID-19. So that leads me neatly onto handing over to Gab, who is going to kick off by taking a quick look at the state of the market. Because of the nature of how we've set up GoToWebinar, I think I have to click all the slides. So you might hear Gab asking me from time to time to click on to the next slide. But I will just click onto the first slide and let Gab take it away.
Many thanks, Simon. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I'm really excited to be speaking with you all today, and thank you for joining us, as Simon said, on what is a lovely afternoon in London. Perhaps there's the appeal of the outdoors is pulling you, but you've given up some time to join us. So thank you for doing that. The topic that we're talking about today is something we speak about a lot, and I think it's been really interesting to think internally how the conversation has to some extent changed over the last couple of weeks, but in many respects also the topic of ambassadors, the way we speak about it has actually stayed the same in many cases. So I'll be interested to talk you through a little bit about that and how we see ambassadors playing a really crucial role for brands at the moment. So looking into the state of the market, I suppose this first slide is it's almost a bit of a doom and gloom scenario, and a lot of what you're seeing is certainly, I wouldn't think, new to you. We've got some general information here about the forecast fall in GDP. Now, I know it's very early days in terms of the economic impact, and much is still unknown, but PwC have recently put out a forecast that GDP is likely to fall in the UK between 3 and 7% on 2019, which is obviously a big range, but both significant reductions. More specifically, the US ad spend is forecast to drop between 6 to 8 billion in H1 compared to the initial forecasts for 2020. Now, what's important to note there is H1 obviously includes some stronger months that we commenced the year on. So obviously January, February, March to a little bit, they were sort of reasonably strong months. So actually, maybe these numbers are underrepresenting the impact on the US ad spend to date. So we can see that there's clearly some reductions in global general markets, and we know these challenges exist. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of challenges affecting brands, but the absolutely major ones, I think there's little doubt that forced store closures is hugely impactful for those brands that do have bricks and mortar stores, and of course events cancellation. They're being cancelled en masse, and this isn't just major marathons. This is trade shows, festivals, conferences. This has obviously huge impacts on businesses, and as a result, traditional marketing avenues are majorly compromised. And I think what underpins a lot of this is the fact that there's just so much uncertainty. So I think if your store is closed for a certain period, that's one thing, and you can adapt to that. Whereas when you're told it's closed indefinitely, of course, that carries significant additional ramifications, and that uncertainty is by no means helpful. However, and this is cue Simon, yeah. The reality is it's not all doom and gloom, certainly. There's some interesting information coming out to suggest that certain aspects within the market and within marketing, there is some, and sales, there is some positive signs. So interestingly, Facebook expected to see a 22% increase in ad revenue on 2019 on year-on-year growth. So it's interesting that there's obviously a divergence of marketing spend towards Facebook, and overall the e-commerce trends is upwards as well. So obviously it depends a little bit on the industry. You can see there on the left in the graphic, average change for outdoor specific e-com is up 18 or 19%, which is really interesting. And of course, there are a lot of variables here. The impact of not having your bricks and mortar stores running influences e-com, but of course, people spending more time on their phones and more time at home plays a big role here as well. So there's some signs to suggest that it's not just like negative impacts on the market. There are some, if you're clever and if you're thinking about where the opportunities lie, certainly marketers aren't simply closing shop. And I think one of the things that we have found to be really promising is what we're thinking is quite a boom in the participation of a lot of the sports in our sector. So specifically in New York, we're seeing anyway an increase, quite a major increase in cycling. So in March, the New York Times reported there was a 52% increase in cycling in some of the major cycling highways. And this is backed up by further stats that we're seeing in the UK, where up to 30% of all trips are being done by bike. So obviously the fact that we're not commuting by tube is a major player here, but people are looking to their bike as alternate travel, which is really interesting. So there's a boom in cycling for sure, and this is backed up by the fact that cycling stores are considered essential services. You know, a lot of them have exemptions to remain open. Running, it's a bit more anecdotal. We haven't seen the statistics yet. It's a little bit slower to get stats on running participation, but certainly anecdotally, I mean, the New York Times, for one, are reporting a significant boom here. But I think if you've spent any time on Instagram, the big one here is at-home workouts. And there is some really, really strong evidence to suggest there's a boom here. And Daily Burn, which is an app, they've reported year-on-year memberships have increased from last March to this March by 268%. So we really are seeing some strong statistics to show that participation in the industry in a general sense is increasing, which is certainly a promising statistic, I think. Now, we just wanted to take a quick moment to have a look at the impact of marketing spend on long-term longevity of a business from a sales perspective. So you can see quite clearly here the impact in green of brands that zero their advertising spend versus in blue brands that maintain their advertising spend year on year. And each peak you can see here, these are cycles. So each peak is a year. So this is 5 years. Now, you might note that in 5 years' time, the lines converge and everyone sort of gets back on track. And I think what this isn't representing is the brands that didn't make years 1 and 2. They couldn't bridge the difference between that green line and the blue line. And so they simply went out of business. So the brands that you're seeing in green returning to their counterparts in years 5 are the brands that were able to survive. So I think the big question here is whether brands think they're able to bridge that gap in lost sales as a result of zeroing their marketing spend. And it's just an interesting, you know, it's one visual representation. If you Google this as a phenomenon, there's a lot of research out there that looks in the impact of marketing spend in times of crisis, but it's certainly something to keep in mind. So looking more specifically at what ambassadors are and what they how they can sort of work with the brand during a difficult time like this. So firstly, who are ambassadors? I mean, I think we internally use the term frequently, and we distinguish ambassadors and influencers as two different things. So an influencer would be, we would talk about it as a more short-term relationship, whereas ambassadors is typically a longer-term, more meaningful relationship with the brand. But the reality is ambassadors have well and truly predated social media. So, you know, in the 90s, for example, we could think of ambassadors as Olympians or TV personalities or the people that we see on the front of our magazines. So ambassadors is certainly not a new term, but I think the term has become far more popular and almost democratized as a result of social media. And so we do see these things like long-term relationships being associated with an ambassador. Brand loyal, or the term exclusive, is often what we talk about with an ambassador. They're exclusive to your brand, particularly for your given niche. And I think one of my favorite things about ambassadors is they become real experts in your brand and your brand DNA. So your brand language, the key talking points, how to describe new products, they're experts in that, and you'll often find them. The ambassadors are the one that are engaging with your audience in the comment section of Instagram posts, and they're getting DM'd about, you know, the difference between the last season's kit and this season's kit. They really are your spokespeople with the people and for the people. And just a quick stat there, 84% of content creators prefer ambassador relationships. What that's talking to is some research that we did within our community of content creators. So as Simon alluded to earlier, we do have you know, over 1,500 content creators within our community of at Freestack, and so we often do talk to them and try to understand you know, what their preferences are. And we spoke to them about ambassador relationships, and they've told us that 84% of them actually prefer these longer term, more meaningful relationships with brand, which is really interesting. So this is hopefully a bit of a visual representation of how ambassadors are able to align with your brand during a calendar year, really, but also how they sync up during certain points of the year. So we see two things on this slide. The first is each influencer. So there's 4 influencers represented here with their icons on the left, and obviously their content calendar goes from left to right throughout the year, along with those months. So what we see is the always on effect of an ambassador. So regardless whether they're aligning with a key brand moment represented in red, they're always producing content. So at times it aligns perfectly with your brand's marketing strategies. At other times it's content that they'll be producing otherwise, and your brand is just now included in it. So the blue represents things that they come up with themselves. It's content that they're producing. Maybe it's content they've always done. Maybe Metal Monday, for example, is something they've done for 5 years, and now that you're on board, you've been on board for the last 6 months, now you're part of that Metal Monday. And so that there's independent things that are unique to each ambassador, and they're represented in blue. And then the second thing we're seeing in red is these really key moments for a brand where all of the ambassadors will come together and align on a brand marketing campaign or strategy or moment. So what's been really interesting, and we'll see a few examples of this in a minute, is brands obviously come together during this moment of coronavirus, and often there's a response. It might be, we're in this together, let's stay inside. And there might be a film or an image or a quote the brand wants to distribute and disseminate, and that's something the ambassadors are able to align on. And then there'll be more business as usual campaigns. For example, the London Marathon, there might be an activation associated with that in October, should it go ahead. And that's, again, another moment where the ambassadors can align with the brand all together, all saying the same thing at the same time, and really dial into what the brand's trying to achieve with that activation. So the two things, just to repeat, are the way that ambassadors can align on key touch points throughout the year with a brand, and obviously the fact that they're always on advocates for your brand throughout the year, regardless of whether you've got an activation on during that month or not. So this is a good example of how a brand can do a simple campaign and ambassadors can align on it during one moment. So I think the thing that we want to talk about here is that in any situation, the reality is there's an inherent limitation of a brand's ability to distribute content to their audience. Brands' own channels are, obviously limited in their reach. So this is something that brands, I'm sure, are all conscious of, but it's, I think, magnified and especially difficult during times of a crisis, because I think the reality is campaigns or messaging that works during crisis or is appropriate rather during a crisis is often really simple, by the community for the community type messaging. It's not a really perfectly refined campaign the brand's been working on and has distributed on their own channels. It is much more the case of what we're seeing here, which is a photo of your shoe, perhaps arranged in a neat way that reflects the Italian flag, for example, but it's something that's really easy to replicate. It's got a really simple message. We're in it together, we're untying our shoelaces, but we're doing it together and we're unified. We're going to stay socially distant, but we're going to stay in solitude with one another. There's some really simple messaging here, but visually it's really really clear. If you see one shoe in a photo, you're going to be like, what's this all about? And so you're going to inquire a little bit. And this is the kind of content it doesn't carry much weight or meaning if the brand's posting it on their own set channels, but as soon as the ambassador group is starting to latch onto it, distribute it, disseminate it amongst their audience, we start to get this viral trend. And this is a great example of the kind of campaign that is appropriate and effective during difficult times. And ASICS were obviously able to capitalize on their ASICS frontrunner team in Italy to be able to distribute this campaign. Now this is Emma. Emma is an Under Armour ambassador, and she's worked with them in various capacities over the last little while. And she's a really good example of how ambassadors are really able to adapt to change throughout their relationship with a brand. Now, change can be anything, of course. It could be the brand's marketing channels or priorities have just changed. It could be that we're responding to a global pandemic. There's many examples of what change is. But what Emma's been able to do really neatly, because she's an expert in the brand Under Armour, and because she's so intimate with the shoes and what they are, why they're produced, what they're best for, and which shoe is perfect for what situation, she's been able to supplement or substitute her Track Tuesday content, because a few months ago you basically wouldn't see Emma anywhere other than at the track or at the gym. But she used to always produce Track Tuesday content, and she's no longer able to do that. So it's the simplest alternative, and it's really neat, but she's quite effectively been able to substitute that for Trainer Tuesday content. And she talks to her audience about questions she's got about the shoes. She fields them sort of through the week, and she's able to give these demonstrations of what shoe is best for what, why they're designed in certain ways, and really inform the audience and obviously engage with them on questions they've got. So it's a really simple switch, but it just shows how quickly and easily Emma's able to go from one day being at the track to the next in her living room talking about the shoes and still producing quality content for the brand and for her audience. And it hasn't required a really deep dive into a realignment of marketing strategy or anything like that. She's able to click her fingers and sort of change up her content strategy quite quickly and effectively. Now, this is adapting to change in a slightly different sense. I think the thing that we talk about a lot is ambassadors in the outdoors and endurance sports sector are authentic for one really important reason, and that's because they all are doing what they say that they're doing. The reality is, I don't know about Simon, but I've yet to meet or come across an ambassador or an influencer rather in this space that isn't doing what they said they're doing, because they're just going to be found out really quickly. You can't be a running ambassador if you don't go for a run and every now and then post about the runs that you're doing and show up to races. You're going to be found out really quickly, and your running audience is not going to be attracted to or inspired by someone that doesn't actually run. So you almost can't be inauthentic. And what's been really promising to see is that when, particularly for those communities, in Italy and Spain, for example, that aren't able to run or cycle or do what their typical activity is, they've been really adaptable in terms of their physical exercise. And so what's been really interesting is that they've remained really authentic, and they've shown it to their audience by the way that they're able to adapt to the type of workouts they're doing. And we did some research with our community again. We did a 2-phase online study in March, so just recently, looking into the behaviours and activity levels of our community during the coronavirus crisis. And you can see on the top right there an interesting graphic of the types of the ways in which our community is staying active. So it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach, but it's been really promising to see that they've remained really engaged, inspired, inspiring, and most importantly, authentic to what they're doing, which is being obviously active people in their sort of particular discipline. Now, one thing that we see quite a lot in difficult times, and this is obviously no exception, is the way that honesty is portrayed in campaigns or in communications. So we've always thought that this is really important, and McKinsey and Co have done a lot of research into the consumer preferences and habits at the moment, and they've found that 46% of consumers really do value honest communication from brands during this particular crisis. And I think what's really interesting about that is there are, again, quite inherent limitations about how a brand can be honest. And the reality is, as an audience, you're looking for people to be honest with you. And of course, there are things that brands can say that are more honest or more dishonest. But the reality is you do need people to be able to channel and distribute or be the vehicle for this message. And so if you're going to do it authentically anyway. So I think what ambassadors are really, really good at is being able to provide that honest voice on behalf of a brand and allow a brand to be present for that moment. And this is really, really key for the current climate. And we've got a few examples here. It's certainly not exhaustive, but Sophie on the top there, Sophie Radcliffe, is a really prominent member. She's a member of the Freestack community, and some of you may know her. She's quite a prominent influencer, and she took a moment away from social media when this all hit because she found it quite difficult. And this is a post of hers saying, "Hey, I'm back. I found it really difficult over the last little while, but this is what I'm going to do to stay active and engaged. And you're going to be along for the journey, audience." And this is an 11-minute video, which she had quite strong engagement talking about that. So she's being really honest, and obviously she's able to take the brands she works with along that journey. Similarly, but maybe a little bit of a different context, is Ben Parks. Again, really an interesting account to follow, and he's an incredible runner himself, incredible marathon runner, semi-elite, and he unfortunately broke his leg or his ankle recently running, and so it's not actually COVID related at all. It's an injury that he's encountered, and his audience is going to be along the journey as he's hobbling along in his basement over the next couple of months. And the brands that he's working with are going to be present for this honest content. But it's going to be a really, I know already he's produced a lot of content, YouTube and Instagram content that's helped his audience follow along this journey. And those brands wouldn't be able to have that honest conversation without Ben or Sophie being a vehicle for them to do so. Now, along a similar sort of wave, I think what brands are also going to be really looking to do is being able to celebrate the small wins as we start to re-emerge as a society from this. So there's going to be a wave of content of influencers and ambassadors and content creators posting about their small wins as we do a re-emerge. And so this could be anything from your first park run back, your first personal best performance, first Sunday long run with the crew, or Track Tuesday, or whatever it is that you do on your weekly routine. These are going to be huge moments and massively documented moments and really organic and authentic moments that are in the lives of these content creators. And this is going to be a really appealing thing for brands to be able to involve themselves in and celebrate, but they're going to have to do it in a really authentic way. And again, ambassadors here become the vehicle that brands can be present for these moments as we re-emerge. However, it's going to be a really delicate balance. You're obviously not able to introduce yourself as a brand with ambassadors at the moment at which they're celebrating these small wins. You've sort of got to be you've got to be there for the downs as well as the ups as a brand. So you've got to make a commitment now, or already have had that commitment with your ambassadors, and be able to go through this journey, this challenging journey, and go through that honest conversation. And then when you get to the wins, it's going to carry so much more weight that you are finally back at parkrun, which your audience already knows is your absolute favorite thing to do on a Saturday morning. And it becomes a really meaningful moment, and the audience is inspired. So it's really simple, authentic, rather simple, organic moments that brands are going to be able to be there for, but they obviously do need to have sort of made that commitment to ambassadors to almost be allowed the opportunity to be present here. So we've spoken a little bit about why we think ambassadors do work, and some specific examples of how you might be able to see yourself working with ambassadors and the benefits of doing so. But there's probably a big question mark over the mechanics of this. And so the next slide is going to talk a little bit about, talk in quite a bit of detail about the mechanics of it all and literally the process. So Simon, if you wouldn't mind, we'll just jump onto the next one. And this is quite in depth, so we won't necessarily read through word for word everything on this slide. For those, if you're wondering, this is all going to be recorded, and we are going to send you through a link, so you'll be able to reflect back on this one. And this is quite a lot of, hopefully some really helpful information for you if you're about to embark on this journey of creating an ambassador program or building or growing your ambassador program. But what's really important here is that this is a step-by-step approach. You certainly can't skip around from point 1 recruitment to point 5 the content plan to point 2 the agreement. You do need to follow through in a sequential manner, but it is really important to hit each of these touch points. If you find yourself, you've recruited a bunch of wonderful ambassadors for your brand, and then you go straight off into the kickoff and you've created a content plan, but you've never discussed the agreement, you are definitely going to be setting yourself up to fail. So it's absolutely crucial to get the right people and agree with them what you're going to do as a brand and ambassador relationship. it's really important to take the time to speak to them about what you're trying to achieve as a brand, who they are as an ambassador, how you're going to work together. You will get a lot out of having a kickoff event with them. It can be virtual in the current situation, of course, but obviously the more you can engage with them in person and the more they can get to know you and you them, it really does solidify the relationship and sets you up for a really successful time. If you've had that moment with them, you've helped immerse them in the brand DNA, and you've been able to talk about the key moments and products for the year. You're going to have a really successful program if you've had that effective kickoff weekend or day or whatever it is. We saw a little bit a moment ago about a content plan. The example I showed where we had always on content and key brand moments throughout the year. This is a really helpful thing to do if at all possible on a one-on-one basis and really set that out. It doesn't need to be completely restrictive and prescriptive for the whole year. A bit of flexibility I think is strongly encouraged, but it's certainly a helpful moment to be able to say, okay, these are the key touch points and this is where there's a bit more flexibility. Monitoring is crucial. The reality is if you don't know what your ambassadors are doing, it becomes very, very difficult to be able to grow your program, understand where the successes and failures are coming from. You know, to be honest, it's very difficult to feed back to your colleagues and your bosses and whoever's asking questions about the program or providing the budget. Monitoring is really, really important to be able to provide some clarity over that, and for you to be able to provide a successful campaign program, to be frank. Team comms is absolutely crucial. Communication is probably something I would say is 80% of what is a successful program is being clear in your communication, and of course payment if that is indeed that doesn't have to be money. That could be payment with product or experiences, but obviously that's certainly an important part. If agreed, the remuneration of them does need to happen in a timely and as promised manner. So this is the sort of circle, and as I said, if you skip any of these steps, it does make it really difficult. So hopefully a bit of a blueprint for you going forward. Now, this is something that we've worked on and worked with for many, many years, and a lot of these are human elements like the agreement, the onboarding conversations, the kickoff, and the content plan. They're elements that us at Freestack, that's our logo in the middle if you weren't already aware. They're things that we've got quite a lot of experience in as people, but we actually built a platform called Freestack, the Freestack platform, which is able to automate and help with recruitment, monitoring, team comms, payment. So these are all things that were inbuilt into that platform for the specific reason of being able to help manage and implement these campaigns. So monitoring, for example, we have analytics page that Instagram sends us their API, and we're able to populate analytics pages for you, so you can see exactly what people are doing, how many posts they're doing. You can see what the posts are, and you can download them at the click of a button. So I suppose the point here is to say that this is something we have a lot of experience in, and this is our bread and butter, so to speak. So it's certainly something that we're happy to have a chat with you about if you have any questions about how any of these steps work. Now I'm going to hand back over to Simon, and he's going to speak to you a little bit about when to start and what the future holds for us here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Gab. I thought that was great, really insightful. I will say to everyone, because there's a lot of you, and I really appreciate your time. We've probably got about 5 or 10 minutes left, so you can all then rush off and go make a cup of tea. But we just wanted to sort of touch briefly on when to start, because I think this is really important. And at the risk of sounding flippant, I think the proverb, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is today, is very apt. The truth is that, as we've discussed, when you are looking for content creators, ambassadors to do stuff for your brand, authenticity comes sort of hardwired into you having had a relationship with these people for a period of time. As Gab mentioned, as everyone emerges from the COVID-19 lockdown and they start experiencing these firsts, that they're going to be their first run since the lockdown, or their first park run, or their first track session, it would be very tempting for brands to think, I want to be part of that. You know, swimming brands, once the pools start opening, if you're a swimming brand, you might think, well, I really want to be there for part of that experience that somebody is going to be talking to their audience about. The reality is, I don't think that the content creators are going to be particularly excited about a brand that they've never heard from during the crisis, kind of suddenly popping up and saying, can I be part of this important moment? And similarly, the content creator, the ambassadors audience is not going to react particularly well, because it won't feel very authentic for suddenly this content creator that they've been following for years in many cases to suddenly be working with a new brand when that brand hasn't been there, well, if not all along, then certainly for a reasonable amount of time. So we would just urge anyone that's thinking about getting into this area to either you know, get involved now, or if you already have ambassadors, you know, double down, really work with those people now, because when they do come to be posting this really exciting content, it will feel much more natural and authentic for your brand to be there and be part of that. I think it's worth stating that these quality content creators, the people that you want as ambassadors, they really do seek meaning and they value their audience. So what they don't want to do is get involved in a brand association which feels really inauthentic, and they'll get called out on that. As Gab mentioned earlier on, content creators can be the best people to talk about your product and your brand or your service, but they need time to really understand your DNA, to really get under the skin of what your brand is all about. So again, it's worth starting as soon as you can. And one thing that we emphasize with a lot of the clients that we work with is you don't need to start off huge. You know, obviously there are some ambassador programs out there with dozens, if not hundreds of ambassadors, and that's fantastic. But actually, we find that brands can get started with a handful, 2, 3, 6, 8. If there's it allows you to understand the kind of people that you want as part of your program, and grow that program in a really kind of organic and sort of manageable way. Starting small and growing allows you to test and learn. And we often talk to brands about the fact that they don't need to commit to ambassadors for life. Actually, what they can do is say, look, we're going to start off with a 6-month program. Probably couldn't be much less than that, but 6 months allows you to get started, and then perhaps you can review things, give everybody some feedback on how they've done, look for areas of improvement, and then potentially add some more ambassadors to the program at that point. And the final point on this slide is to say that if you have existing ambassadors, they might not even be people that you call ambassadors. They might just be people that have just been part of your brand for many years. By creating an ambassador program, you've got a really good opportunity to bring them into the fold, help them to do a better job of telling your brand story, talking about your products in a more kind of formalized way. So don't reject the people, don't forget about the people that have been there talking about your brand all along. But that's a little bit about when to start. And as I mentioned at the top of this webinar, we're gonna dip our toe a little bit into the future. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball. I don't think anybody does. But I think it's important to sort of have a bit of a think about what the world might start to look like in the endurance sports and outdoor space post COVID-19. There's lots of data to suggest that traditional bricks and mortar retail won't rebound to the same degree that it was an important part of consumers' lives before COVID-19. So 16% of consumers are expecting to do less offline shopping, and actually a similar number are doing more online shopping. McKinsey, we've referred to this study before, but McKinsey said that nearly 1 in 5 consumers, people that were questioned for this survey, said that they worry about the infection implications of shopping in person. So again, there's lots of sort of data that suggests that the trend towards online shopping is just going to continue upwards. And I think one of the things that we anticipate is going to become a more important aspect of working with ambassadors is that there's going to be this move towards affiliate relationships. So it's something that we've been testing with a few clients before now, with good results, I would say, but not exceptional results. It's just been an interesting kind of experiment. We think that what's going to happen is that as people re-emerge and want to start shopping again, want to start buying products, they want to start running, cycling, and getting outdoors even more, and at the same time they are doing more and more online shopping, I think that the opportunity that ambassadors represent as helping to drive affiliate sales it shouldn't be underestimated. But again, hammering home the same point at the bottom there, a successful affiliate campaign is based on established relationships. So it's back to this idea that if you have an ambassador program that could do with being kind of amplified, or in fact you're thinking of starting, now is the time. You know, it might take 6 months to get to a point at which you've got a team of ambassadors who could conceivably start to post affiliate links. So there is no time like the present. So just to wrap up, I mean, we started off talking about the doom and gloom. There's lots of uncertainty in the market, but there are some green shoots, some hopeful shoots in the endurance sports and outdoor space. Certainly running and cycling looks as though it could be going through a mini boom. Gab talked about the fact that ambassadors are nimble and they provide an opportunity for brands to kind of talk about celebratory moments and really be involved in some really positive news, but only if those relationships are already in place and have been tended to over a reasonable amount of time. As I just said, ambassador programs don't have to be global. You can start small, you can grow it out, you can test, but the point is to be doing something. And ambassadors are not restricted just to brand building awareness, but building brand awareness, sorry. You know, affiliate programs may well become something that helps brands to supplement their sales efforts with affiliate programs. But this isn't something that can be the first step. The first step has to be building a relationship. Obviously, Gab mentioned this in terms of how we can help. We can obviously help brands to build an ambassador program from scratch. If you already have an ambassador program, we can help you to amplify it and make it more effective. We can either do that in a very hands-on sort of way, so we can manage everything for you from finding your influencers to setting up the program, making all the agreements, monitoring, reporting, or in fact we can provide a tool that allows you or a marketeer within your team to manage your own ambassador programs. And certainly because you've taken the time to listen to Gab and I go on for coming up to 45 minutes now, we're offering 50% off for the first 3 months for any brands that want to take advantage of using a Freestack platform, and you only have to commit to 1 month. So hopefully you found that interesting. We're obviously really keen to hear from brands. Oops, sorry, I've forgotten about this bit. We've got 2 more webinars coming up. We're looking at using data and insight next week on Tuesday at the same time, and then next Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, we have a sort of 101 on setting up an influencer campaign from start to finish. So you're very welcome to sign up to both of those. We'll be sending out details by email, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you've got any questions or any comments, please feel free to drop me a line, simon@freestack.com. Gabrielle is also Gabrielle@freestack.com. So we'd love to hear from you.